Promises should never be made, especially those spoken with the heart on fire, under the light of the full moon, without understanding the true weight of the words. And what if I told you that a simple vow could become a sentence? That a pact of love could turn into an eternal prison? Sounds like a legend, a horror movie, doesn't it? But believe me, some stories are much more real than we'd like to admit. They were in love, so deeply that they decided to seal their union in a way that could never be undone, not by life, nor by death. But there's a detail no one ever mentions. Some words do not belong only to the living. And when a pact is made under the full moon, the universe listens, and it demands payment. That's exactly what happened to this couple. What began as a vow of love turned into a nightmare with no escape. Because time passed, fate changed, but the promise remained alive. Or rather, it came back to collect. Now imagine this. The love of your life vanishes without a trace. Silence settles in, but something in the air changes. Objects begin to move on their own. A familiar whisper returns, rising from the darkness. And then, a presence. One you know far too well to ignore. But is it really them who came back? Or is it just the pact reminding you that some stories don't end, not even after death? From the very beginning, the two seemed inseparable. It wasn't just love, it was one of those rare connections that time cannot erase. On a night lit by the full moon, they chose to seal their bond in blood, a pact of eternity, the kind you hear about in ancient tales and stories from long ago. They swore never to part, not even in death. The thing is, some promises aren't meant to be broken or understood by hearts in a rush. He cut his finger. So did she. They mixed their blood and repeated words they'd heard in an old song, the kind that feels like a warning, but we only hear the melody. They believed it was just a symbol of love, a beautiful gesture, almost poetic. Little did they know that some vows don't remain in the world of the living. And you know what's curious? Sometimes, the greatest traps in life are hidden inside the most romantic stories. They laughed, embraced, fell asleep believing they had done something magical. And they had. Except magic doesn't follow the rules of logic. There's a price to pay when you touch what you don't understand. And the most dangerous thing of all is that the universe listens. The problem is, it listens carefully and collects with interest. But of course, that night, neither of them realized what was truly at stake. And what came next, no one could have imagined. In that village forgotten by time, every child grew up hearing stories told by a silver-haired woman with deep-set eyes. They said she could see beyond the veil, and that every word she spoke carried a hidden warning. When she heard of the young couple's pact, she didn't hesitate. She called them in, with the voice of someone who's seen too much. She said that promises made under the full moon do not belong only to the living. Most people laughed at her, but those who paid attention knew there was more than superstition in her words. The elder, with a trembling voice and steady eyes, explained that the full moon opens doors. Doors that cannot always be closed. Words have power, she repeated, especially when spoken with a heart in flames and a vulnerable soul. She told them about a couple who made a similar pact and was never seen again. Only whispers remained. But blind love doesn't listen to warnings, and the two carried on as if it were just another one of the many stories she kept telling. Funny how we sometimes treat wisdom like dust. We ignore it, sweep it under the rug, and carry on with life. But every warning has a reason, and every caution, no matter how strange it may sound, carries the weight of someone who has already fallen where you haven't even stepped yet. She knew that, and even realizing she wouldn't be heard, she let one last phrase slip. Be careful with what's promised under the moonlight. Some words echo forever. And from that moment on, something started to change. Everything happened so suddenly. One day, she was there, laughing, dancing on the porch, telling those stories only someone who truly loves knows how to tell. The next day, she was gone. No sign, no trace, no goodbye. He searched everywhere, in the woods, by the river, along the trails where they used to walk hand in hand. Not a single footprint, not a single sound, only silence, growing heavier in his chest like a stone. And that silence had something strange about it. It seemed full of whispers. Days turned into weeks, and his eyes began to change. They always seemed to scan the emptiness, as if waiting for her to appear from the mist. At night, sleep escaped him. In place of dreams, there was that eerie feeling, as if someone was watching him in the dark. Not ordinary fear, but the kind of unrest only those who've lost someone suddenly can understand. As if the person's presence got stuck in the air, hanging between walls and ceiling, waiting to be noticed. The stories she used to tell before bed now sounded like omens. It didn't take long for him to realize something was wrong. The mirror fogged up without steam. Doors creaked even while shut. And there was a familiar scent, sweet, soft, like her perfume, blended with something he couldn't quite name. That absence began behaving like a presence. One that didn't knock, didn't ask permission, it just was there. And as the nights went on, the signs grew clearer, more insistent. It all started with the footprints. Muddy, small, yet heavy, appearing mysteriously in the hallway. At first, he thought it was in his head, or maybe some animal had snuck in. But no, the footprints came in pairs, aligned, as if someone was walking back home. The most unsettling part? They stopped right at the bedroom door. The stories of spirits returning home started making far too much sense, far too late. Then came the misplaced objects. A necklace once locked away in its box now sat atop the table. The porch chair, always still, rocked gently on its own when he arrived. And then, the whispers. Not full sentences, just fragments. We promised. You swore. Barely audible voices, but with a tone he knew better than anyone. Her voice. The same one that used to calm him on hard days. Now, it sounded like a reminder. Like a debt unpaid. One of those stories that comes back to collect in the end. Each night grew heavier, as if the air carried memories refusing to die. What once was home had turned into a sanctuary of something beyond what the eyes could see. He locked doors, turned off lights, repeated to himself that it was just grief playing tricks. But deep down, in the very core of him, he already knew. That was the promise, knocking at the door. And the pact might still be in effect. Desperation led him to rummage through her belongings. Every drawer, every hidden box, every scrap of paper with old notes. That's how he found the diary. A worn leather cover, yellowed pages, and handwriting he would recognize anywhere. At first, it was just memories, daily records, reflections on good days and bad. But then, the words changed. The entries turned dark. Premonitory dreams, hurried warnings, as if her hand trembled while writing them. And there, between the pages, he found what should never have been forgotten. A warning. A fear she never voiced. One of those stories that screamed to be read. She knew. Somehow, she knew something would spiral out of control. Never break the pact, one passage read. Words have roots that tangle in the soul, and a promise made under the full moon doesn't belong to us alone. Cold sweat slid down his neck. With every page, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. It was as if the diary itself had been waiting to finally reveal what had been hidden. But the worst was yet to come. The final pages were torn. Someone, or something, had tried to erase the last words. As if trying to bury the end of that story. His heart pounded in his chest. What had she discovered? Why didn't she say anything? Why had she never mentioned those dreams? He tried to mentally reconstruct the missing words, but his mind offered only one clear thought. Maybe it was too late to understand. The promise had already been made. And now, the pact was collecting its debt. But was there a way out? Or was the only solution written in pages that would never be read? When fear becomes too great to ignore, we grasp at anything for a way out. That's how he found the village witch. A woman with a face marked by time, piercing eyes, and a voice that seemed to cut through skin. She already knew why he had come. Before he could say a word, she whispered. You called her back, and now she wants what is hers. The air in the tiny hut grew heavy. This wasn't just a curse, it was a bond. One of those knots the old stories warned should never be tied. He tried to argue. I just wanted to love her forever, he said, as if love could justify a pact made in innocence. But the witch laughed, a short, humorless chuckle. Words carry weight. You didn't just promise love. You promised eternity. Silence swallowed the room. A chill ran down his spine. The pact wasn't just a vow. It was an anchor that bound his soul to his wife's spirit. And now, she was coming to claim what was hers. These stories always end with a price to be paid. The witch didn't offer false hope. There was no way to bring his wife back, not as she was. All that remained was a choice. Fulfill the pact and cross over, or find a way to sever the bond without losing his life in the process. But she warned him, nothing comes without a cost. If you want freedom, you'll have to give something in return. He swallowed hard. The love that once felt like his greatest blessing now became a debt he couldn't repay. And to make things worse, night was falling, and he knew she would come. The night was heavy, as if the sky itself knew what was about to happen. He walked toward the cemetery, following the whispers only he could hear. The gates creaked in the icy wind, and the mist crawled along the ground, covering the graves like a veil. Deep within, among forgotten tombstones and crosses bent by time, there she was. Or what was left of her. The silhouette formed in the darkness, still, waiting. His heart raced. There was no more doubt. The pact was claiming its debt, just like in the stories of old that warned of promises made beyond death. Her face was still familiar, but something was wrong. The eyes were not the same. Empty, hollow, reflecting something that didn't belong to the world of the living. But the voice? The voice was exactly as he remembered. You promised. The words came out soft, but carried a weight that made his knees tremble. She wasn't there to haunt him. No, she was there to take him, to bring him with her, to the place where their love would become eternal. Not in the romantic way he had imagined, but in the cruel way these stories always end. Terror gripped him, but something inside fought back. It can't be this way, he murmured, trying to convince himself there was still a choice. But was there? The wind grew stronger. The ground seemed to vibrate beneath his feet. She extended her hand, inviting him to cross the boundary between worlds. He felt an invisible pull, something urging him to give in, to accept, to surrender. But part of him still resisted. There was still a thread of hope, one last chance. If there was a way to break the bond, it had to be now, before it was too late. He couldn't just accept it. Not like that. There was still something that could be done, still a chance to undo the pact. With trembling hands, he pulled from his pocket the object that had sealed the vow, a small locket, inside of which were strands of hair entwined, a symbolic representation of their eternal union. The witch had said destroying it could weaken the connection, but it wouldn't be easy. Bonds made under a full moon aren't broken with fire alone. Some stories demand more than strength. They demand sacrifice. He lit the flame and tossed the locket into the fire. The flames danced, devouring the metal and the memory he had carried for so long. For a moment, the air seemed lighter, as if something had been pulled from his chest. But the illusion didn't last. The wind blew violently, extinguishing the fire in an instant. The locket, now deformed, was still there. And then came the sound, a long, painful wail, coming from all directions, as if the night itself was weeping. A chill ran down his spine. Her spirit would not vanish so easily. These stories never have simple endings. The shadow of his wife twisted, the once empty eyes now glowed with something close to fury. You swore. Her voice echoed through the cemetery, full of pain and accusation. The pact would not be broken without consequence. He dropped to his knees, feeling an invisible weight crushing his chest. Perhaps he had made a mistake. Perhaps the very act of trying to break free had only strengthened the bond. And now, more than ever, he understood. It wasn't enough to try to run. He would have to pay the price. The witch had warned him, nothing comes without a price. To be free, he would have to offer another promise, a new pact to replace the old one. But who, in their right mind, would make a vow knowing the cost it might demand? He had no choice. With each passing minute, her presence grew stronger, more solid. She was no longer just a whisper in the dark, a shadow in the mirror. Now, she was there, close enough for him to feel her cold. Some stories don't end, they merely change shape. With a trembling voice, he asked what he had to do. The witch, expressionless, offered a way out. Make a new promise. But choose your words carefully, because some can never be undone. He hesitated. Could he vow eternal love in another form? Could he bargain his soul without condemning himself? Time was running out, and her presence pulled at him, calling for what had been promised. His heart pounded like a war drum. It was either accept his fate or risk a new pact. And from these stories, he already knew. Every promise carries a weight. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes and murmured words he barely understood. A vow of release, of rest, of peaceful separation. The wind stopped. The night grew silent. When he opened his eyes, she was gone. Had it worked? Had the pact been replaced? Or merely postponed? He felt free, but deep in his mind, Something whispered that promises never truly vanish. They just wait for the right moment to be fulfilled. For a few days, he believed he was free. The air felt lighter, the house less oppressive. The whispers ceased, and objects stopped moving on their own. For the first time since her disappearance, he managed to sleep through the night without feeling an invisible weight on his chest. But absolute silence is dangerous. Some stories don't end with a clean cut. They merely rearrange themselves, waiting for the right moment to reappear. It happened on a random night, while he was washing his face. He looked at himself in the mirror and felt a chill run down his spine. His eyes looked strange. Not exactly different, but off. He blinked, and the reflection blinked back, a moment after him. A tiny mistake, imperceptible to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. But he was. His blood froze. He leaned closer, staring at his own image. And then, in a low whisper, almost inaudible, her voice echoed from the mirror. "You promised." The shock made him stumble back. The pact hadn't been broken. It had simply changed form. She was no longer on the outside. She was inside him, bound in a way no which could undo. And now? How long until he was no longer himself? Until his own mind no longer belonged to him? The horror wasn't over. Some stories, no matter how hard we try to end them, never stop haunting us. And now I ask you, how far would you go to keep a promise? Do we truly understand the weight of the words we send into the wind? Some stories teach us that certain vows aren't just symbols of love, they are contracts. And every contract has a hidden clause. This young man believed he could seal a fate without consequence. But life and death prove that nothing comes without a price. If you were in his shoes, what would you do? Would you have the courage to face the unknown in an attempt to break a bond that transcends time? Or would you simply accept the fate you built with your own words? This isn't just a scary story. It's a reminder that some promises never die, and that the past always finds a way to catch up with us. Now tell me, have you ever made a promise you regret? Do you believe words have power, or is it all just superstition? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story and want more stories like it, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who loves a good mystery. Because some promises can be broken, but this one, you have to keep.